Harlem in the early 1930s was alive in ways outsiders never understood. Music spilled from basement clubs until sunrise. Numbers runners moved through crowds like ghosts. Every corner had a rhythm, every block had rules, and at the center of it all stood Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy wasn't the loudest man in the room. He didn't need to be. His presence alone bent conversations. People knew his reputation: intelligent, disciplined, and dangerous when crossed. He read poetry, quoted philosophy, and ran Harlem's streets with a precision most mob bosses could only dream of. Chaos was bad for business. Betrayal was unforgivable. That's why the man who sold him out hurt more than any rival ever could. The betrayer wasn't some desperate outsider looking to make a name. He was trusted. Handpicked. A runner who had eaten at Bumpy's table, laughed with his men, and carried messages that could bring down entire operations if spoken aloud. He knew which doors stayed unlocked, which apartments hid guns, which nights money moved. 4 years, he moved freely under Bumpy's protection, mistaking discipline for mercy. Then the police came. Not a routine bust. Not bad luck. This was precision. Squads hit multiple locations at once. Safe houses were emptied. Trucks seized. Men arrested who were never supposed to be found. Bumpy barely escaped the dragnet himself, slipping away minutes before officers kicked in a door meant to cage him for life. Someone had talked. Harlem buzzed with fear. People whispered names. Everyone swore innocence. But Bumpy didn't guess, he waited. He listened. He watched how men avoided eye contact, how hands shook when his name was spoken. And then the runner disappeared. No goodbye. No warning. One day he was there, the next he was gone. His room cleared out. His usual corners empty. Even the streets seemed to know what it meant. Guilt didn't always leave fingerprints, but flight was a confession. Bumpy stood in silence when the news reached him. He didn't slam tables. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply nodded. In that moment, something settled deep inside him, not anger, but certainty. Betrayal had a shape now. A face. A debt. The damage from the betrayal was severe. Money lost. Allies shaken. Trust fractured. And worse than any financial loss was the insult. Bumpy Johnson believed order was sacred. Loyalty was currency. And this man had broken both for a handful of dirty police dollars. Others urged him to let it go. Times change, they said. Men disappear, they said. Bumpy said nothing. Because he knew something they didn't. In Harlem, power wasn't measured by how fast you struck back. It was measured by how long you were willing to wait. And from that night on, whether the betrayer knew it or not, his life stopped moving forward. It was simply running straight toward a reckoning that didn't need to hurry. Bumpy Johnson had all the time in the world. The night he ran, Harlem didn't chase him. That was the mistake. The betrayer left before sunrise, carrying only what could fit in one worn suitcase. No farewell. No note. He avoided the main streets, cutting through alleys he once used for drops and handoffs. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. Every shadow felt like it moved on its own. He didn't look back. By noon, he was on a train heading north, sitting stiff in his seat, eyes locked on the window as Harlem shrank behind him. He told himself the hardest part was over. That once distance replaced familiarity, fear would fade. It didn't. In his new city, he became careful in ways he never had before. He changed his name, nothing flashy, just common enough to disappear into paperwork. He found a job that didn't ask questions. Long hours. Honest pay. No shortcuts. No side hustles. He avoided bars. Avoided crowds. Avoided anyone who asked where he was from. Harlem, he said, was a long time ago. At night, though, the past sat with him. He replayed the betrayal over and over, justifying it differently each time. He told himself Bumpy was too powerful, too insulated. That the information wouldn't really hurt him. That everyone talked eventually. That he'd been forced. But the truth crept in when the city went quiet. He had sold out a man who trusted him. And men like Bumpy Johnson didn't need to chase. They remembered. Years passed. 1 turned into 3. 3 into 6. His hair thinned. His hands roughened from work that left no room for ambition. The streets he walked were dull, predictable, safe. That safety became proof, in his mind, that he'd won. No knock at the door. No stranger asking questions. No whispered warnings. He followed Bumpy's story from a distance. Heard about the prison sentence. The return. The resurgence. Every headline tightened something in his chest, but nothing happened. No retaliation. No sign. By year 8, the fear dulled. By year 10, it was almost gone. He convinced himself of a comforting lie, that time erased debts. That empires moved on. That he had become too small, too irrelevant to matter anymore. He even allowed himself routine pleasures. A favorite diner. A familiar table. Small conversations with waitresses who didn't know his past. He smiled more. Slept deeper. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that distance had never protected him. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't look for revenge the way others did. He didn't flood streets with gunfire. He didn't make noise. He let the world turn. He let men age. He let guilt soften them. And somewhere in Harlem, a name stayed alive, not on paper, not spoken aloud, but held carefully in memory. A man who had disappeared thought that was enough. He was wrong. Because disappearance wasn't escape. It was simply the space between the betrayal and the moment Bumpy decided the wait was over. When Bumpy Johnson returned to Harlem, the streets felt it before the people did. There was no parade. No announcement. Just a subtle shift, conversations lowering, movements becoming more deliberate. Harlem remembered its king. Prison had taken years from Bumpy, but it hadn't taken his mind. If anything, it sharpened it. He came back older, broader, quieter. The rage of youth was gone, replaced by patience so deep it unsettled even his allies. He had learned something most men never did: power didn't need to rush. The Italians noticed first. The Genovese family had long understood Bumpy was different. He wasn't reckless. He honored agreements. He spoke their language, not just words, but respect, leverage, and consequence. They dealt with him not because they liked him, but because crossing him created problems that never ended. Politicians felt it too. Bumpy didn't hold office, but votes moved when he spoke. Donations appeared where needed. Protests didn't happen unless he allowed them to. He knew which doors to knock on and which ones never needed knocking at all. And the police? They watched him carefully. Not because they could stop him, but because they knew what happened when they underestimated him before. Harlem under Bumpy wasn't chaos. It was controlled. Numbers ran on schedule. Turf stayed stable. Violence was precise and rare. Men understood that drawing unnecessary attention wasn't just bad for business, it was disrespectful to the structure Bumpy enforced. That structure was built on memory. Bumpy remembered who stood by him when things were hard. Who paid their debts. Who broke their word. He didn't forgive easily, but he never confused forgiveness with forgetting. Behind closed doors, Bumpy kept no written records. No lists. No ledgers. What he carried was far more dangerous. Names. Favors owed. Insults delivered. Betrayals unfinished. Among them, one name never faded. The Runner. Years had passed, but Bumpy never asked for updates. Never sent men searching wildly. He knew that desperation made mistakes, and mistakes drew attention. Instead, he let his network breathe. Old contacts resurfaced. New ones formed. Information flowed naturally, the way it always did in Harlem. Some men thought Bumpy had let the betrayal go. That prison had washed it away. That survival demanded moving forward. They misunderstood him completely. Bumpy didn't operate on emotion. He operated on balance. And betrayal created imbalance that demanded correction no matter how long it took. Every time a man crossed him after that, the punishment was immediate and educational. Not excessive. Not random. Enough to remind everyone watching that loyalty still mattered. That time didn't protect you. Because while Harlem changed, new music, new faces, New money, the rules under Bumpy stayed the same. You could make mistakes. You could fail. You could even lose. But if you betrayed him, time didn't heal that wound. It preserved it. And somewhere beyond Harlem's borders, a man living under a borrowed name had no idea that his debt was still accruing interest, quietly, patiently, until the day Bumpy Johnson decided it was time to collect. It didn't happen the way revenge stories usually do. There was no gunman tracking footsteps. No shadow slipping through alleys. No sudden knock at the door. It happened because the world is small and Harlem's memory is long. The man who saw him first wasn't looking for trouble. He was passing through on business, stopping at a modest diner just outside the city. The kind of place men ate alone, minds on their plates, eyes on nothing in particular. He slid into a booth, ordered coffee, and that's when something felt wrong. A face across the room. Older. Heavier. Softer around the edges. But familiar. The man paused mid-sip, staring just long enough to confirm what instinct already knew. The scarless face had aged, but the posture hadn't changed. The cautious way he sat today. The habit of watching the door without turning his head. Those habits didn't disappear, no matter how far you ran. This was no stranger. This was the runner. The betrayer. The contact didn't approach him. Didn't confront him. Didn't even finish his coffee. He paid quietly and left, heart beating faster with every step to the door. He knew better than to act alone. Some information wasn't meant to be handled personally. It was meant to be delivered. By nightfall, the message reached Harlem. Not through phones. Not through letters. Through mouths that knew how to whisper. By the time it reached Bumpy Johnson, the details were precise. A diner. A town. A routine. A table the man favored. The contact didn't add opinions or suggestions. He didn't need to. Bumpy listened without interrupting. No expression crossed his face. No flicker of surprise. When the man finished, Bumpy simply leaned back and nodded once. "Good," he said. That was all. No instructions followed. No orders barked. No immediate movement. Anyone expecting violence misunderstood the moment. Bumpy wasn't excited. He wasn't angry. He was satisfied. Because confirmation mattered more than speed. For the next few days, nothing happened. Bumpy went about his routines. Meetings. Dinners. Quiet walks through neighborhoods where people still lowered their voices when he passed. To the outside world, it looked like nothing had changed. But inside, a decision had been made. Bumpy didn't want chaos. He didn't want witnesses telling wild stories. And he didn't want death, not yet. Killing was easy. Forgettable. Final in the wrong way. This was about memory. He sent one message, through one man, with one instruction. Set the table. No address. No time. Just understanding. Because the man would still be there. Creatures of routine always were. Comfort was the final trap. After years of hiding, the betrayer had allowed himself a favorite seat. A favorite hour. A favorite meal. He thought the world had forgotten him. Meanwhile, the man he betrayed was choosing clothes, not weapons. Choosing words, not threats. Choosing the exact moment when recognition would return to the betrayer's eyes. The sighting didn't ignite revenge. It completed it. After 11 years, the chase was over. All that remained was the walk to table 7 and the lesson that was about to be carved into flesh, so it could never be forgotten again. The restaurant wasn't special, and that was exactly why it worked. It sat just off the main road, clean but unremarkable, the kind of place people chose because it felt safe. Soft lighting. Cloth napkins. No jukebox. No noise loud enough to draw attention. It was where men went when they wanted to be invisible. Table 7 was along the wall. The betrayer chose it every time. From there, he could see the door without looking obvious. Old habits never die, they just learn how to dress themselves up as caution. He arrived early that night, like always, and ordered the same meal. Meatloaf. Coffee. No alcohol. He liked to keep his head clear. He had no reason not to. 11 years without consequence had done their work. The fear that once sat in his chest like a weight had softened into something manageable, almost distant. He told himself, not for the first time, that he had paid his price already through years of anxiety, restraint, and self-denial. That had to count for something. The door opened. He didn't look up right away. He heard footsteps, measured, unhurried. Not rushed like a worker, not hesitant like a stranger. Something about the rhythm made his hand pause halfway to his cup. When he finally raised his eyes, the room seemed to narrow. Bumpy Johnson stood in the doorway. No coat pulled tight. No weapon visible. No bodyguards flanking him. Just a man who didn't need permission to enter any room. Time collapsed. 11 years disappeared in an instant, replaced by the night the police came, by the sound of doors breaking, by the choice that had saved one life and condemned another. The betrayer's mouth went dry. His legs felt weak, useless beneath the table. Bumpy saw him immediately. Their eyes locked. Bumpy didn't smile. He didn't glare. He simply walked forward, step by step, each movement deliberate, as if he had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. Chairs scraped softly as he passed. Conversations faded, people sensing something without understanding it. Bumpy stopped at table 7. Without asking, he pulled out the chair opposite the betrayer and sat down. Up close, Bumpy looked older than the man remembered, but heavier with authority. His eyes were calm, almost curious, like a man examining something he'd misplaced and finally found. 11 years, Bumpy said quietly. The betrayer tried to speak. Nothing came out. You picked a nice place, Bumpy continued, glancing around. Quiet. Respectable. You been eating good. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Each one landed with the weight of everything that had been unsaid for over a decade. The betrayer's hands trembled in his lap. He wanted to beg. To explain. To say he'd been scared. That he hadn't thought it would go that far. But Bumpy hadn't come for explanations. This wasn't a conversation. It was a conclusion. Bumpy reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact. The betrayer flinched. And in that instant, before the razor ever appeared, he understood something too late. Bumpy Johnson hadn't followed him to kill him. He had followed him to make sure he never forgot who he really was. And table 7, once a symbol of safety, had become the place where the past finally sat down across from him. Bumpy's hand came back from his pocket slowly, deliberately, as if time itself had agreed to wait. There was no rush in the movement, no tremor, no hint of uncertainty. When his fingers opened, the straight razor rested in his palm like an old promise finally kept. The metal caught the light. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't large. Just a simple tool, clean, precise, and final in its purpose. The kind of object that didn't belong to chaos, but to intention. The betrayer's breath shortened. His eyes dropped to the razor and then snapped back up to Bumpy's face, searching for mercy, for rage, for anything that might tell him what came next. He found none of it. Bumpy leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so only the two of them could hear. "This ain't about killing you," he said calmly. The words didn't comfort the man. They terrified him more than any threat could have. "This," Bumpy continued, "is about remembering." For a brief moment, the restaurant seemed frozen. Forks paused midair. A waitress stopped at the edge of the room, sensing a shift she couldn't explain. No one intervened. No one spoke. Something about Bumpy's stillness warned the room to stay exactly as it was. The betrayer tried to stand. Bumpy's eyes flicked up. That was enough. The man froze in place. With one controlled motion, Bumpy brought the razor across the betrayer's face, not wildly, not brutally. Just once. A clean, measured slash. Pain flashed sharp and sudden, followed by shock. The man gasped, clutching his cheek, the world spinning as the reality of what had happened settled in. It wasn't fatal. That was the point. Bumpy sat back, watching him carefully, making sure the lesson landed fully. Blood was not the message. Survival was. A scar was something you carried. Something you saw every morning. Something strangers noticed even when they didn't ask. A reminder. The restaurant remained silent, paralyzed by the authority of the moment. No one rushed forward. No one screamed. Fear had a way of organizing itself when it understood who was in control. Bumpy wiped the razor with a napkin and placed it gently on the table between them, blade folded. "You live with that," he said. "Every day. Every mirror." The betrayer nodded frantically, tears mixing with shock, hands shaking as he pressed the napkin to his face. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Words were useless now. Bumpy stood. He adjusted his jacket, glanced once more at the man he had waited 11 years to face, and delivered the final truth, not loud enough for the room, but heavy enough to echo for a lifetime. "So you don't ever forget who you crossed." Then he turned and walked away. No guards followed. No sirens sounded. No one tried to stop him. The door closed softly behind Bumpy Johnson, and only then did the restaurant exhale. At table 7, the betrayer sat shaking, alive but permanently changed, marked not by rage or chaos, but by patience. In Harlem, that was the most dangerous weapon of all. The man at table 7 lived, but life was never the same again. The cut healed the way all wounds do on the surface. Stitches came out. Blood dried. Pain dulled. But the scar stayed, thin and unmistakable, running across his face like a sentence written in flesh. No matter how carefully he shaved or how he angled his head, it caught the light. It demanded attention. Strangers noticed. Some stared too long. Some looked away too fast. A few asked questions he never answered. He stopped going to the restaurant. Stopped sitting near doors. Stopped feeling safe anywhere. Because safety, he now understood, had been an illusion he borrowed on time. Word traveled quietly, the way real stories always do. Not in newspapers. Not in police reports. But through the underground channels that carried truth better than ink ever could. In Harlem, the message was clear without being spoken aloud. Bumpy Johnson had waited 11 years. And he had collected without spilling a drop more blood than necessary. Men discussed it in whispers. Not with excitement, but with respect. This wasn't a tale of rage or recklessness. It was a lesson. A reminder that loyalty under Bumpy wasn't enforced by constant violence, but by certainty. You might survive today. You might survive tomorrow. But debts were forever. The Italians understood it immediately. They had their own codes, their own long memories. What Bumpy had done wasn't excessive. It was measured. Surgical. Exactly the kind of response that preserved order without inviting chaos. It told allies he was patient. It told enemies he was inevitable. The police heard rumors, of course. But rumors were all they had. No witnesses willing to speak. No victim eager to explain how the most powerful man in Harlem had sat across from him and walked out untouched. Fear sealed mouths tighter than loyalty ever could. As for the betrayer, he didn't stay long. Within weeks, he quit his job. Packed up what little he owned. Moved again, this time not out of hope, but out of terror. He avoided mirrors when he could. When he couldn't, the scar pulled him back to that table, that voice, that calm certainty in Bumpy's eyes. He had escaped death. But not judgment. Back in Harlem, Bumpy never spoke of it publicly. He didn't need to. His work continued. Meetings happened. Deals were made. The city breathed under his control the way it always had, steady, disciplined, aware. To younger men coming up, the story became a warning disguised as legend. Some thought it was exaggerated. Others knew better. Either way, they remembered the ending. Because in a world where violence was common, restraint was terrifying. Bumpy Johnson didn't destroy the man who betrayed him. He branded him. And in doing so, he sent a message that outlived both of them. You can outrun bullets. You can outrun years. But you can't outrun memory. Not when it belongs to a man patient enough to let time do half the work. In Harlem, they still say that revenge is best served cold. But Bumpy Johnson proved something far more dangerous. Sometimes, revenge doesn't come to kill you. It comes to make sure you live long enough to remember exactly what you did.